Hey everybody! One of the things that makes playing electric violin fun is that we get to use a lot of different effects to transform and change the sound of the instrument. So a lot of people will ask us, am I able to do some of that with my acoustic violin? It's a pretty good question. So let's answer that. The answer is yes and no. First, of course, you're going to need a pickup or a mic in order to get your sound into a form that can be manipulated by these effects pedals or processors, right? So we're going to need a pickup or a mic. And we've done videos on this to explain the difference, but we'll go real quick here. A mic is going to capture vibrations out of the air next to the violin, and a pickup is going to capture vibrations directly from the physical instrument itself, okay? So a mic is going to sound more like what you hear because it's out in the air and it's hearing everything in the world, which is good and bad. The pickup is going to be more isolated and it's not going to have any surrounding noises. It's not going to hear the dishes clinking in the kitchen and it's not going to hear the drummer next to you on stage. So a mic is going to be a lot more likely to feed back, and a pickup is going to be better with most effects because it's a more isolated signal and it doesn't have all this other distracting information in there to confuse the processor. And it's a thing, believe me. So with acoustic violins, they make sound. You can hear them. That's the entire point of having an acoustic violin, right? So think about the fact that this instrument is making sound and the signal coming out of your amp is making sound. And both of those are significant values depending on the room that you're in. An electric violin is almost never going to be loud enough that the audience is going to hear it unless it is like dead quiet in the room that you're in. And I'm just never in rooms like that because I have kids. So in a small venue, your audience is going to hear the instrument and it's going to hear the amplifier. So we've got to consider the fact that if we're putting effects on that signal, the audience can hear the unaffected signal and the affected signal. Even on a louder stage where people are mostly hearing just the speakers, you are still going to be able to hear that instrument under your ear in a lot of circumstances. And the vocal mics that are nearby are going to be able to hear that instrument, at least in some circumstances. So we've got to consider, depending on which effects we're using, that some of that dry signal, that unaffected signal, is going to pass out to the audience. I like to kind of think about there being two general types of effects. One I call additive effects, which means that they add to and include the sound of your violin. And then transformative effects do not include the raw sound of your violin. They've spun off into outer space somewhere, and they're much different than additive effects. Additive effects, we would say, are like reverb, delay, harmony. Even with harmony, the clean sound of your violin is coming through. So be aware, again, like we say, the instrument's making sound and the amp is making sound. Depending on how loud that amp is, if it's pretty quiet because you're in a small room, then people are going to hear the instrument and the amp. And if you're in a pretty loud room, they're mostly going to hear the amp, but there's almost always, in a lot of circumstances, going to be a blend between the instrument and the amp of what people are hearing or what you are hearing. So we're going to listen to a couple videos where at the beginning of the video, the amp, let's pretend that the amp is pretty loud and the instrument's pretty quiet. And then the middle of the video, they're roughly equal. And then the end of the video, the instrument's pretty loud and the amp is relatively pretty quiet. It'll be on the screen. You'll see it. Yeah, so one thing to think about is that your experience, if you can hear the violin pretty strongly under your ear, could be pretty different than the audience experience if they're mostly hearing the speaker. And then if there's people sitting close to you and they can hear the instrument, people far away with the amp. So everybody's experience in that room could be a little bit different. And it's important to remember that when you're setting up your effects. If I'm trying to dial in my delay, I'm not hearing that much of it under my ear because the violin doesn't have any. So I might be turning it way up in the amp so it sounds right to me, and then the audience is getting killed with this delay. So just think about those types of things. With transformative effects, it's even more complicated. So some of these you might want to blend in with your dry signal with an electric instrument. With an acoustic, you don't necessarily have that much control over this. The instrument just kind of makes the sound that it makes, right? So you'll notice pitch shifting was on that list, and you said harmony was additive. Harmony is when a new pitch is blended with the clean sound. If I'm playing a C, harmony would add a note to the C. So the C would come through, and then maybe an E or an F or an R, some other type of note would come out. Shifting is when the original note is not heard. And that's a type of situation where maybe I'm going to shift my instrument down a half a step, because sometimes there are bands you're going to play with that they tune to E flat instead of E, and all that sort of thing. So if we shift, like I said, if we shift the pitch down a half step, it's going to be really awkward if I can hear the instrument and the audience is hearing the speaker, or vice versa, right? Yeah, sounds like some new music or something, or like maybe we got a couple of people just trying to learn how to play. So yeah, obviously that's problematic. It's really hard to do true pitch shifting with an acoustic electric or an acoustic with a pickup, just because the instrument does make enough sound. The pitch shifting is problematic. So let's talk about distortion. That's the thing everybody wants to talk about, all the cool kids anyway. Distortion, there's some dangers when we start attaching a distortion to acoustic instruments. The reason is distortion is an extreme form of compression, and compression makes you much more susceptible to feedback. And feedback's the thing we're trying to avoid. Can you use distortion on an acoustic violin? Yes, you absolutely can. You're going to have to use some countermeasures though. The instrument needs to be protected from its own signal. So if the amplifier on stage is pretty loud, you're going to be dealing with feedback problems. So maybe you can use in-ear monitors. You might want to use lower levels of gain. Anything that you can do to protect the instrument from hearing that loud, distorted signal, that's going to help you. When I recorded this, there wasn't any sound coming into the room at all other than the instrument. And then I added a distortion in the computer, so there was no chance that we're going to cause any feedback. So you actually can get a pretty nice distortion sound. You just have to fight feedback. The other thing about distortion is that distortion makes your notes do things that they wouldn't do with an unaffected sound. So if you're listening to a clean sound under your ear and your audience is hearing a distorted sound, that distorted sound may be doing stuff that you don't know about, and you don't have the ability to counteract it because you don't know that it's happening. So it can be a little bit dangerous. You do want to be able to hear that affected sound if you're trying to use distortion. So in-ears might be the way to go for that. I just picked one random other effect that's really, really transformative, and that's synth. So we're going to listen to some synth here. You'll hear what it sounds like with an acoustic electric violin. Yeah, the same thing goes for synth. Synth can kind of sometimes make polyphonic things act weird. And if you're not hearing that synth really strong in your ear, it could be problematic because it's going to be doing stuff that you don't know about. And the audience is going to hear it, but you won't. And usually nothing good comes from that. Anyway, all that to say, yes, you can have effects with your acoustic instrument as long as you've got a pickup or a mic on there. But there are some caveats. So you may not have the easiest time of doing that the same way a person with a solid body acoustic electric would, but you are not excluded from the party. So yeah, congratulations to you. Have some fun playing with the effects. As always, be sure to subscribe to our channel, check out some other videos we've got, and we will see you guys next time.